What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. As a lot of you may know, I love tracking the OCG's metagame to get a glimpse as to what might be to come for us here in the TCG. The products are released several months ahead of time over there when they're first released, and then we don't get them for months, maybe even sometimes years later. So yes, their card pool is different, their ban list is different, but a lot of the time, some of the top decks over in the OCG will end up being the same here in the TCG, and you'll get to see a lot of the same tactics and plays used, and sometimes even some nice tech cards as well. So I wanted to share with you guys one of my sources of getting this information, and that is Road of the King. Road of the King is a great website to provide you with any sort of OCG related content. It's in English, which is usually probably the biggest barrier to entry when you're looking for this, because a lot of the time you can find these deck lists on like Twitter and Facebook, but they might be in Japanese or Chinese, so you're gonna have to use like Google Translate, or if you know someone who knows how to translate it, that's even better. But Road of the King is just a great resource. This video isn't sponsored or anything. I just want to share with you guys one of the sources that I use, but also try a different style of video where we can actually go over these meta analyses and also just kind of do some of our own analysis of our own to see how some of the trends in the OCG might translate over to the TCG for us players. So we're going to be going over the OCG metagame number 0. This is for their brand new ban list for January, even though it says 15th through 30th of December 2020. These results are using their new ban list. And as you can see, this actually isn't too different than what we are currently dealing with here in the TCG. Now, obviously, as TCG players have Drytron in the mix, but the OCG has Max C, and I think Max C definitely puts a check on some decks like Drytron from being able to do very well, because if Drytron wants to compete, you have to give your opponent 6 cards if you don't have like the Max C or the Crossout Designator to stop it, and that can definitely matter. So the OCG's format has definitely always been more conservative, but even with Max C, sometimes combo decks are so strong that it doesn't even matter. I mean, you can see right here, Virtual World's at the top of the metagame at 18.5%, and Virtual World is like a combo control deck. While it does have a lot of combo plays and does a fair amount of special summoning, it's really a control deck at heart, because let's be honest, it's just true King of all Calamities Turbo. Eldritch is coming in second here at 12.6%. It's actually multiple variants. You can see down here, there's Zodiac Eldritch, Pure Eldritch, Dogmatica Eldritch, Artifact Eldritch, there's some Evil Twin Eldritch in the mix, Invoked Eldritch, and Zombie Eldritch. Dragon Maid's taking up a very interesting slice of the pie, and we'll get to that towards the end of the video at 10.4. You also have Phantom Knights, Code Talker, Salamangreat, Adamantipator, Zodiac, and a bunch of others. Code Talker's a deck that we really don't talk about too much here in the TCG. I think we're missing a few key cards from this deck even being remotely playable for us TCG players. Shocker, right? The OCG has a deck playable that we don't, but this is something I guess to look out for in the future. I don't even know if it would be that much of a meta viable contender with the way our format looks, but who knows? We'll have to see as the future progresses. So let's go ahead and scroll down here. Here you can just see everything in terms of what this meta analysis was comprised of. I also have a link down in the description so you guys can check this out for yourself. But let's go ahead and start off with Virtual World. So Virtual World was untouched by the new limitation regulation, and as expected, they performed exceedingly well in the previous week. The deck build remains the same as before, making Virtual World an easy choice to pick up for the tournaments as their strategies have been figured out and optimized. That's the same for us here in the TCG. Virtual World was completely unscathed from the most recent ban list. They didn't hit Calamities, they didn't hit any of the cards in the deck, so there really isn't a reason to change a deck that already has been winning event after event. The following week saw Virtual World have less dominance as more players are now teching against them, but they still managed to remain amongst the top alongside Eldritch. So here is, just as an example, a version of the deck that they are playing over there, and it's funny because when you see this, aside from obviously Max C, this looks almost identical to the Virtual World decks we are playing here in the TCG. You have everything, you have all your main components of the Virtual World cards, you've still got your Ash Blossoms. We probably play Gamma instead of playing Max C. Some people play Nibiru, but you have 3s of everything. One card in particular that we don't have here is Crossout Designator. This is something to look out for when we do finally get this released. It's a quick play spell that reads, declare one card name, banish one card with that name from your deck, and if you do, until the end of this turn, its effects are negated, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of cards with the same original name, and you can only activate it once per turn. So this card's role is basically just to be a 3rd, 4th, and 5th copy of Called by the Grave, or if you want to reverse it, Called by the Grave is supposed to be a 4th and 5th copy of Crossout Designator, because Crossout Designator can actually hit more cards than just hand traps. Hand traps are obviously one of the biggest ones, but you can also use it to negate the effects of other cards too, which is what makes it stand out for a lot of players. It also can actually potentially hit something like Infinite Impermanence, which Called by the Grave cannot. Not being played in this deck, but something to keep in mind. It does require you to dedicate some of your deck space to playing maybe some one-ofs of cards that you want to cross out, but honestly, honestly, that's worth it if you can ensure that your plays go off. So Virtual World is slated to actually get even stronger if in fact Crossout Designator is going to be released in Blazing Vortex. There's also the new trap card down here which comes out in Blazing Vortex, and that is Virtual Gate Zhuanwu. Now I probably completely butchered that, but this is a continuous trap. It is a gate card. During the battle phase, if you control another Virtual World gate card, you can target a face-up monster on the field, change its battle position. That's like whatever, that's not what's important. What's important is this other effect. During your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target a virtual monster in your graveyard. Special summon it, but its effects are negated, then send one card from your hand to the graveyard. This now means that Virtual World has access to an extender to allow them to possibly play through more forms of disruption. You're seeing it as a one-of, it's typically played as a one-of, and honestly, that's perfectly fine because you can send it off of Lulu, you can send it off of a lot of different cards, and then you have that extender to be able to push through one of your opponent's interruptions, and that is really, really solid. So even when you look at the extra deck, this is almost identical to what we play here in the TCG. A good amount of the TCG players have moved over to the Chao Fang version of the deck because it allows you to combo a little bit harder, but for the most part, like 14, if not 13 of these cards in the extra deck are almost identical, and that really is no surprise. So interesting to see. There's also the side deck down here. This is just giving you a glimpse of the other cards that they're playing. Again, you want to play all cards to be able to help possibly stop against Crossout, or with Crossout Designator, stuff like Nibiru, Lancia, you know, Gamma even for that matter, and then another copy of Maxi because it's Maxi. Why wouldn't you? Let's move on to Eldritch though. So Eldritch has Curse Eldland semi-limited, but in return, both Dino Wrestler, Pankratops, and Red Reboot became limited. Overall, Eldritch came out ahead in this exchange, and it reflects in their early performance. This is really big that Red Reboot wasn't actually limited over there because it kind of hindered the ability for any sort of trap decks to be viable, but now that it's limited over in the OCG, this is a really big deal for these types of decks. Zodiac Eldritch inched ahead as the better performing build. Having access to Zodiac Trident greatly improves their opening setup against Virtual World. And this is the list. And again, Zodiac Eldritch is one of the most popular variants that we play of this deck over here in the TCG. Now, it does look a little bit different. Remember, Curse Eldland is semi-limited, but that hasn't stopped this deck from being completely playable. They're still on pretty much all the same cards we are on over here. They're playing the Ghost Spells. They're playing the Skullmeisters. This deck's actually playing Rapier, which is interesting. I don't know why you would really play Rapier because I feel like it doesn't really do a whole lot. You have all these other ones that are much more effective, but this deck's on Rapier. That's perfectly fine. You still have the 2 Call by the Grave. You have all your other Elixir cards. This one's actually playing the Golden Land Forever +3 Solemn Strike, only 1 Torrential, and this one's actually teching a copy of Mistake as well. Very interesting. For the extra deck, though, there's one card that the OCG has access to that we TCG players do not have yet, and that card is number F0 Utopic Future Dragon. This card is insane. So it's a light warrior Xyz effect monster, rank 0, 3000 attack, 2000 defense. It requires 3 Xyz monsters with the same rank except number monsters, but you can always Xyz summon this card by using a number 0 Utopic Future you control as material, and you transfer its material. So you're going to be summoning this very similarly to Zeus, so you're already going to be used to that. Cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. That's already pretty strong. And then once per turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect as a quick effect, you can detach 1 material from this card, negate the activation, then if your opponent controls that monster, take control of it. The fact that you also get to take the monster as well is insane because that means your opponent can't use it for a Link summon. They can't use it to go up into a Zeus. They can't use it for anything. The fact that you're negating the effect and taking the monster instead of just destroying it, because a lot of the time, sometimes destroying the monster is also bad because it might have some sort of graveyard synergy or what have you. So being able to take it and then using it for your own purposes is incredible. This is a card that we don't have yet, and I'm not exactly sure when we're going to receive this. There hasn't really been any talk about this yet, but if Zodiac Eldritch is still around when this card gets printed, that deck is going to receive a huge boost. Let's go ahead and check out the side deck quickly. Not really too much here. They're still playing the Gammas. They have 1 Droll, 3 Lancia, 2 Nibiru, and then a nice suite of 1-ofs, Dark Ruler No More, Harpy's Feather Duster, Dimensional Barrier, 1 Ice Dragon's Prison. We are really on this card over here, and Anti-Spell Fragrance. Then we move on to the more interesting part of the video, which is Dragon Maid. So the rise of Dragon Maid was due to their good matchup against Virtual World. Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres and Dragon Maid Tidying are able to return a card to hand, making them an excellent disruption protection against Virtual World by chaining to their target and denying the special summon. Psyframe Gear Gamma is one of the best hand traps against Virtual World and is also relatively more flexible in Dragon Maid because Dragon Maid Tiding and Dragon Maid Downtime could be used to return their own Dragon Maid monster to the hand to empty their field of monsters, and in turn, enabling Psyframe Gear Gamma to be activated. I mentioned earlier that Dragon Maid is something to keep an eye on if you're watching any of my previous meta-analysis videos or tier lists, and this is why. When you see something like this emerge in the OCG, it is definitely something to consider. We've also had some players here in the TCG actually doing rather well as of late with this deck, but it's still relatively under the radar. So this just gives you an idea of what one of their decks over in the OCG looks like. Our variants definitely look a little bit different because we don't have access to Pot of Disparity yet. We will be getting this in Blazing Vortex, so you're going to start to see this card a lot more and in a lot of different decks. And for people who don't know, Dragon Maid Tiding, the card that they were referring to, says target one Dragon monster you control and one card your opponent controls or in their graveyard, return them to the hand. Then you can banish this card from your graveyard and special summon a Dragon Maid monster from your hand or graveyard in defense, but return it to your hand during the end phase, and you can only use one of either of these effects once per turn. So what's nice is that at the very least, it's a Monster Reborn, which allows you to just have plenty of extenders, but it can also be used similarly to Hieratic Seal to be able to bounce cards back. And what's interesting about this list in particular is that it actually isn't main decking Psyframe Gear Gamma. A lot of these decks are actually side decking it. So the OCG philosophy might just be to side deck the Gammas and for when you know you're going second, because Gamma is just super strong when you can actually catch your opponent with it. But other than that, that's pretty much going to do it for this. Everything else looks pretty straightforward, but I hope this just gives you a glimpse as to what the OCG's format looks like, but also gives you some ideas for maybe some decks you might want to try out here in the TCG. Again, our formats are different. Drytron is like the strongest deck in our format, and so that could completely invalidate something like Dragon Maid potentially because our format is a little bit more faster, relatively speaking, but there could be an opportunity for Dragon Maid to emerge depending on how the way things shift up. The meta is an ever-evolving beast, and who knows where it's going to be a few months from now. What I love about Road to the King is that we actually get weekly articles and metagame reports, and if this is something that you guys enjoy, just being able to look over some of these decks and be able to actually see some of these cards for yourself and maybe get some ideas for what you might want to play in the future, maybe this can be a new series that we decide to pursue, and it just gives you guys some more information as to what you might want to be on the lookout for as these new sets start to come closer and closer. When you get into some of the more in-depth versions of these articles that aren't necessarily just on a broader meta level, but some of them go super in-depth on specific decks and can actually discuss some of the more intricate plays, and you'll see why that some decks are playing specific cards. Some things that you'll hear some of the TCG players learning is actually just straight from the OCG, and I think that's just great to be able to give you guys more knowledge and help you up your game by getting ahead of the curve. So guys, that's gonna wrap it up for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon to get early access to every episode of the Yu-Gi-Oh Progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.